Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
Let's put on the show.
You're listening to the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Beth
and Brian.
So it's been a minute, guys, but we've got an exciting episode, and I got to thank Brian for pulling this one together. Which, if you've been around for a little bit, you know that means that you are in for a history episode this week. I'm pretty excited about this one, and I know you are too. So
I am too, yeah. A week ago, Mario came to me and he said, "Brian, if you don't come up with a new history episode, you can go to hell." And I said, "Go to hell? That gives me an idea."
Oh.
I'm just joking. Mario didn't say that. Mario is super nice, but that'll give you a little hint in what the episode is, or I'm sure you've read the title to it.
Now it just means we have to come up with a clever title that doesn't tell you what it is.
Ooh.
Station 71 goes to hell.
But as always, we have some news to discuss, and I think this week it's kind of a mixed bag. I didn't realize what the second one that I put in here was when I was about to say that. But this first news topic is definitely a positive one. So Disney has added some representation to It's a Small World. They're getting some updated dolls, I guess you could say, with some wheelchairs to give some new representation to this attraction. I think this is a really positive thing, and I'm surprised it took this long, but also very happy that this is a thing that they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like this is such an easy way to give the representation that I think a lot of people are looking forward to seeing. And I hope that they continue to push it a little further, because I mean, that's kind of the whole point of It's a Small World, is representation. So we got a bunch of different cultures and ethnicities and stuff. So I think, like you said, it's about time that they started adding in other ways to represent people within those cultures.
Definitely.
This next one is not positive, but I think we need to talk about it. Recently, Bob Chapek has said that he will establish a cost structure task force, and a hiring freeze has begun at Disney, which also has included some staffing cuts.
I can't help but think, like, okay, so we got shares hitting a new 52-week low, and he thinks, well, let's continue to degrade the guest experience. That will solve it, right? This doesn't make sense. Is he just living on like another planet where he doesn't see that there are really simple solutions to bringing shares up? Like, yeah, I get it. You want to give money to the shareholders because they're like your quote unquote bottom line. But people are so disenfranchised with the parks lately that I feel like that is the cause of a lot of the, stock drop.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And honestly, this is not good news at all. But the only positive that I can really take away from this is that hopefully, if they continue making these terrible decisions and we continue seeing drops like this, that maybe some big corporate level changes will be coming because of that.
It's just so bizarre to me. Like, the one thing that I've kind of been like just tossing around in my head is it feels like Disney has gotten more complicated, and we've talked about this a lot. Like, I'm not going to talk about my experience, but from the outside perspective, like it's not, even the ones on a Lifetime Guest, who is their target demographic, they're hearing how hard it is to plan a Disney vacation, and that's making it, like Beth said, they're disenfranchised with the parks. Like, there's so much that I feel like has changed at Disney in the last couple of years, and it's not even just like parks level. Like, I don't know. I keep seeing ads for this new movie, and I don't remember what it's called because I just keep trying to block it out, and it genuinely does not feel like a Disney movie to me anymore, and it's bizarre.
Stranger World.
Yeah, it feels like
Mhm.
straight up a DreamWorks movie.
Yep.
Right. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I'm not trying to, like, take a dump on DreamWorks or anything.
No.
But there's a different standard. There's a different, like, visual aesthetic that we're used to seeing in Disney movies. And it really feels like they're leaning more towards that, like, weird, blocky, like, character design that I hate.
Well, and even just
they've been doing it for a minute, but
they
it just
have
keeps getting, like, worse.
Well, and even just like the dialogue in the trailers and stuff, it feels very not Disney. And I don't know. I feel like that's the thing is like, like you said, it's very, I mean, obviously we're outsiders. We don't know the, whatever they're looking at in those board meetings and whatnot. But like, it almost seems like the answer is very obvious. It's the company doesn't feel the same way it used to. And the people that are kind of roped in, I guess, for life, so to speak, are, kind of falling out of favor with it because of that. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
it's always weird to talk about this because I feel like we always kind of, do the thing of like, well, it's awful. Things are bad, but we're still going to talk about Disney every week. So
God, I know, right? I feel like, and Laz and I were talking about this the other day, that it just feels like the company as a whole is spread so thin in every department that because the bottom line is so focused on profit instead of, like creating masterpieces of movies and like creating an amazing guest experience. Like, you think about like less than 10 years ago, if you asked somebody where is the best customer service company wise, I feel like 9 times out of 10 people would say Disney. And I don't know if that's true anymore because and you can't blame the cast members because they're spread too thin because they're not hiring enough people to cover all of the like duties that need to be done. It's just, you think about how many Marvel movies and TV shows and stuff we get every year, how many Star Wars things we get every year, how many Disney movies and Pixar movies and all this stuff coming out. And it's just like, I feel like most people would be fine with a couple of really, really good things rather than like 15 things and only half of them are decent.
Definitely. And I think, like y'all were saying earlier, the fact that they, like the DreamWorks thing, they're trying to catch up or do something that they see in other companies doing when Disney used to be the trendsetters with animation, with theme parks, with TV, with so much stuff. And it's like they still have that grip over the entertainment industry where they can be the trendsetters to do that. But for whatever reason, they're trying to pinch pennies, and that's making them fall behind.
Yeah.
And I mean, realistically, I guess the not the positive spin on it is I feel like there's two ways that this could have gone, and we're probably living in the best case scenario, right? Like, Disney comes out of the pandemic and they're not run by somebody who is focused on the bottom line and they run the company financially into the ground. That's probably the worst case scenario. Would we have gotten some cool stuff out of it? Probably. Would it have been a crazy time to be alive? Probably. But I feel like during the pandemic and like during the ending of all of that and like everything reopening, they did need somebody financially focused. But I feel like they've held on to the things that they needed to do in order to stabilize. And instead of trying to grow and move back to where they were, they're still just like, well, these things worked, so let's keep doing them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with the reservation system.
Can we
like
also
that
just
feasibly should be gone.
Hate it. I hate it. I feel like I haven't been to the parks since February. And I know a lot of people out there who don't take trips very often. That does not sound like a long time, but that is a very long time for someone who's used to going to the parks 3, 4, 5 times a year.
Yeah.
And I'm just like not motivated to do that anymore because I know that it's going to be a pain to plan and it's going to be overcrowded and the lines are going to be insane. And I'm like, it didn't used to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this.
Yeah.
We have, funny enough, and I mean, this is like, I guess it's tying into Beth's point. This is the first time in a very long time that we have had the option to go and just decided not to. And it feels so weird saying that out loud. Like we have we're traveling in March for a wedding and we're going to Texas. So it's not like we're going like super close, but we were thinking since it's around the time of our anniversary, we're like, we should do something. And the idea of Disney came up. We talked about it for a little bit and then we just both decided, you know what? No, I don't think we want to go. And that feels weird.
Yeah. I feel you. I mean, that's how I felt when I didn't renew my annual pass. I was like, oh man, this feels like the end of an era. And it kind of has been. Like, I don't regret letting my annual pass expire at this point. Like, I'm pretty much going back to the way it was before. I was a pass holder, and I'm just like, well, I'll just maybe take one trip a year and see how it goes.
I mean, if we were in a different situation where we didn't have to pay for it and everything, we didn't have to plan it, then maybe. But the fact that like we're already traveling, we feasibly probably could have just, you know, hopped a plane, gone over another couple hour trip, and then gotten there. But also around the same time of planning a trip to a wedding, trying to plan a Disney trip, all of the thought going into that, and then also trying to manage new systems that we haven't really had to deal with before. No thanks.
I know. And I feel like I'm the type of person that I really try to keep a hold of like trends to an extent. I mean, I'm not listening to like every single song that comes out and trying to be trendy in that way, but like I am terrified of becoming one of those old people who's just like, well, I don't know how to use an email address. I don't want to be like that. And especially in the field that I'm in, I can't be like that or I'm not going to succeed. And I just feel like I don't want to learn these new systems. This is like the first time that I kind of feel like an old person where I feel like, ooh, I'm really like threatened and daunted by having to learn how to use Genie Plus and stuff. And I'm just like, it just seems like overly complicated.
Right. And I feel like, I mean, we've kept up enough that I feel like if I was really thrown into the fire, I probably could do it. It's probably not that bad, but like, it just seems daunting now.
So it's just spontaneity feels dead, you know?
Yeah. We went a couple weeks ago to the Magic Kingdom and I actually got Genie Plus just to give it a shot and see how it was. And it's not terrible. Like it, for the most parts, you know, it works similarly to the old Fast Pass system where you can get as many as you want if you get there early enough and plan it out right. But it turned out to be not super useful for our trip. Now, granted, we didn't plan out very well. Like we didn't get to the park until probably like right before noon. And you know, like obviously we've been there at gate drop and like actually got something early and planned it out better. We could have gotten much better fast passes, but it definitely wasn't worth the price of doing it the way we did it. But I also feel like a lot of people are going to do that. They're going to buy Genie Plus day of and try to use it to plan, and then it's not super useful.
Well, and also to that point, like this is the point that I was originally trying to talk about with, you know, how miscommunication's been like making it probably seem worse than it actually is too. So you're losing those people that normally it's not that big of an issue on. I mean, my aunt and uncle, pretty big Disney people. They go kind of the same frequency that you used to go. So they just got back from a trip and my dad works with my uncle and he was just telling me about how like all of these new things. And he was like, it just makes me not want to go. And my parents aren't big Disney people. Like, you know, they used to go on family trips and stuff, but they've never gone out of their way to go. And he was like, you know, they were talking about how you have to buy fast passes now. And like, that's the part that's funny to me is like, we talk about the lingo, we talk about the things that we understand, but like people that don't keep up with these trends aren't equating them to, like, they're equating them to the things that they know. And
Right.
that's the part that's just wild, is like, he had specifically said, you have to pay for fast passes now. And the way that he explained it, it made sense to me because I'm reading these things, but like thinking about it from an outside perspective, that's kind of scary. Like, he was like, oh yeah, they paid for this service called Genie Plus, and then they had to pay to ride Guardians of the Galaxy, which was an extra $15. And he was like, that just seems like so much on top of an already expensive vacation. I was like, you know what? I complain about these things because they're different to me, but I've never really thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This is that we've kind of strayed a little bit off of the news topic here, but I feel like
Yeah,
every time this comes up, we have to talk about it.
I feel like if it's like you kind of were saying, is like if it's daunting to people like us, imagine how daunting it is to other like people who aren't familiar with the parks and services that they offer.
Yeah,
It just
absolutely.
seems like a lot. And I guess I haven't always been, but in recent years I have definitely been the type of person that I just wanted to wake up and let it play out.
Yeah.
Like being able to go to the Disney parks as often as I have been, that's kind of the exciting part of it. It's just like, strolling along and seeing what happens. And I just feel like that's becoming harder and harder to do.
One last kind of point off of this, that's you just made me think of something else that he had said, and it's kind of funny, is like, I feel like before, we used to have this discussion about how you can feasibly do a very relaxed Disney trip. You can wake up, you can go, you can do what you want to do. Like, it's so easy to do that for two people. It was the philosophy that we hung to for so long. But they were talking about it, and my dad was telling me that him and my uncle were talking about it, and my aunt was getting up at like 7 a.m. to book Lightning Lane reservations and things like that. And he was like, there was one time that she would get up and get the reservations on previous trips, but now it's like every morning you have to get up that early. And I asked him, I was like, is that something that she read online, or because that's always been the thing, is people online like to talk about the in-depth planning that you can do, which is very true. But he was like, oh no, they actively are advertising that this is how you need to do it. Like, cast members were telling them, oh well, if you want to get all of them, you should be up as early as they open, and they open up at 7. And it's like, you no longer can say that this is the thing because everyone is saying it's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the part that like kills me.
And that's kind of the thing that I feel like I did like about the old Fast Pass system, other than the fact that it was free.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's like you got into the park and you could, well, I'm talking about the old paper Fast Pass system. And I didn't love it because you had to run around, everywhere trying to get the Fast Passes. But it felt like it gave everybody kind of an equal chance. Or even if you didn't want to get there like super early, you'd still be able to probably get a fast pass for a couple of things. Now it's like if you don't wake up and start making them at 7, and then when those are out, you make new ones, and then when those are out, you make new ones. If you're not like keeping up with it, you're going to be standing in line forever. Yeah. And that just feels like so much work for a trip that already takes a lot of planning.
And energy. It takes so much energy.
Yeah. I want to close this conversation out by saying that I am not a fan of Chapek with a beard in this photo.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It does not work for him. I feel like I like a beard on like 90% of people, but he ain't one of them.
I think this photo of him with a beard has aged him more than being at the Walt Disney Company has.
I was going to say that, man. He looks at least 15 years older with this beard.
Yeah. How old is this dude anyway? 65?
All right, let's see. 62.
This article,
62.
He is 62 years old.
Another man of almost retirement age making decisions on our behalf. Love it.
I don't know if I want to dive too far into this, but I every time I think about like what comes next, like he's only 9 years younger than Iger, which is wild. So I mean, we have him for maybe 9 more years, if that. Who is next? And I don't think that there's anybody that's like a very obvious replacement.
Yeah, I don't know, but they got to do something. I'm losing
Yeah.
hope here.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we'll keep talking about it until it gets to be too much. So,
Yeah.
but in actual positive news, and I know that this is one that Beth is super excited for. Phantasmic's back, and
Yay.
it's been updated, so that's exciting.
I know. I've been trying not to read about it and like see anything about it, but a couple of things have gotten spoiled for me, and I'm just kind of excited about the changes that they've made. I think as long as the overall, and I don't know because, like I said, I haven't done any digging because I kind of want it to be like a first time experience, is like me seeing it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they kept like the overarching theme and that some imagination, I feel like any change they make, I'll be okay with.
Yeah, I want to watch a video of it eventually, but I want to wait for like a very high quality video to come out because I'm not gonna keep this a secret for too long. I also don't want to talk spoilers because I think that it's still so new that leaving what I've read about as surprises is pretty cool. But I will say, I think from what I have read, it seems to fix the majority of my large issues with this show. So I'm super excited about it.
Nice.
Cool.
Which, like, this show realistically should be the best, nighttime entertainment in a theme park. And I know that Beth is going to fight me for saying that because you're going to say it is the best nighttime entertainment.
Yeah, I was like, what do you mean it should be?
I just think that there should be no contest for Phantasmic, and I'm thinking we're finally getting there where it probably is the best. They knocked out Illuminations, so at this point, there's not really a contest.
Oh, whatever. Like Illumination is better than Phantasmic anyway.
Anyway, I will turn it over to you, Brian, so you can tell us about our exciting topic this week.
Well, real quick before we do the history episode, I'm not going to do a trip report, but we have gone to the parks twice now in the last month. And I just want to say that any advice that I gave beforehand about traveling to the parks before I had a child, just disregard it because man, oh man, it is a different animal. So yeah, it's good. It's fun in a different way for sure, but it's funny looking at, like, on paper, how much less stuff we end up doing in a day at the parks with a child than went before.
Especially like baby, not even like a toddler or like an elementary school age child.
Right. Now, I will say that we went to Animal Kingdom 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and Animal Kingdom actually works out really well for us because it was like anytime that Olive needed to take a nap or something, she would just nap in the stroller, and then we could do like the walking trails and stuff and get to see
Oh,
animals.
perfect.
So it worked out well. And then when she was up, we'd be like, okay, let's go get on an attraction that she can do real quick, and then it worked out. So I think Animal Kingdom was good with that. Magic Kingdom, surprisingly, if you have like a very small child, like Olive's about to turn 1, for those of you that don't know,
That is insane.
It's wild.
Yeah, it really is. But funnily enough, like, I think Magic Kingdom is one of the worst parks for having a kid that small that needs to take naps, just because there's not a lot to, I feel like, to do while they're napping like there is at like Animal Kingdom or even Epcot. I feel like you could hit World Showcase or something while they're napping something, but anyways, yeah, still have fun. And it's but yeah, it's different. It's like, oh man, we were there for like 5 hours and we did like 2 actual attractions.
Wow.
But yeah, it's fun. But I'm kind of like, getting to do meet and greets now is fun because you get to see their reaction and stuff. So it's different. It's fun experiencing the parks in a different way like that.
Now I gotta ask, because when this was back in February, right? The last time that I went, that you guys met us at Epcot with Olive.
Mm-hmm.
And she was an absolute pleasure. She was just like chilling the whole time. Is she still being pretty cool, or is she turning into a toddler?
Now she's definitely not as chill as she was back in February. She's still really good, and honestly, when we're out and about and stuff, she's like she doesn't really cry that much. Like if she's whatever, if we're pushing her around in a stroller and she's sleepy, she kind of just will go to sleep, or she'll just stare at stuff until she's tired enough to go to sleep. Now at home, it's kind of like she'll get bored, and then she does, or if she's getting sleepy, and then she gets a little fussy. But nah, for the most part, she's good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I feel like the only one you haven't done with her is Hollywood Studios, right?
Right. And I was talking to Jordan about that, and I'm like, when the hell are we gonna go to Hollywood Studios? Because what is she gonna do there?
That's exactly what I was
Right.
thinking.
Like,
I
what
was like,
can you do?
Right. So
I
I'm like,
would be,
we're gonna have to get a babysitter or something, because it doesn't make any sense to bring her.
I would
Right.
be interested to know your rankings of like, best parks to have to take your baby to. But I feel like Hollywood Studios does not need to be on that list because there is literally nothing. But well, I guess that's not
Frozen
true.
sing along. Like,
And like the
that's,
Disney Junior Live on stage.
yeah.
I feel
But
like
who
there's more
wants to
shows in
do
that park.
those?
Frozen sing along. Frozen sing along.
Frozen
All
sing along's
right.
fun. All right.
Yeah, it's
Don't
fun.
sleep on Frozen sing along.
All right, so you got one thing to do at Hollywood Studios then.
Yeah, really. That's kind of wild.
Muppet Vision, I guess, if she's not scared of the dark.
Now, see, here was the thing. When we went to Animal Kingdom, I thought, oh, let's do It's Tough to Be a Bug. One, she will not keep 3D glasses on. Two, I do not remember that show being as terrifying as it was.
Oh,
it can be a little
yeah.
scary.
And it's funny because like I'll play around with her and like scare her and stuff, and she giggles, like she'll jump and then giggle, or we'll be on the swing or something, and you can tell it kind of like grabs her stomach, and she like giggles after it scares her. But I have never seen true fear in this child's eye.
Oh no.
Like when the smoke comes out near the end of It's Tough to Be a Bug, and she literally like screamed, turned around, and like threw her arms around me, and I was like, "Oh
no!"
So yeah, I
That
forgot.
ride is surprisingly terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Also, the Hopper animatronic wasn't working, which was weird. Which was like,
it's like you should have told me that in line. I wouldn't have even bothered.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, you live and you learn.
Yeah.
But there is a substantial amount of that attraction missing when the Hopper animatronic is not running.
Absolutely.
Like, what do they even do? Is it like a voiceover?
So it was weird. It literally just continued like it was
As if it were there.
So literally, like Flick is talking to nothing, and at first I was trying to think, and I'm like, is Hopper like normally off screen and then the animatronic pops up, but then it just never popped up, and I'm like, oh, it wasn't working. So yeah, it was pretty awkward.
Yeah, dang.
Huh.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
yeah, I guess definitely wouldn't have read that then.
Yeah, wish I'd have known.
I do like that you're trying to prepare her to be a thrill ride kid, though.
See, I think she will. I'm gonna get her one of those. I don't know if you've seen the little like baby roller coaster things where they just sit in a little car and you push them down the little hill.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I'm getting her one of those for her birthday. I'm gonna start, getting her used to stuff.
Nice.
Brian's gonna start building one in their backyard. It's gonna have a little mini roller coaster back there for her.
I wish, man. I've seen the people that do that. I'm like, man. But I don't have that kind of space anyways. So.
This is your application to be a Disney Imagineer.
Yeah. Well, they put the hiring freeze in effect, so.
Well,
yeah. Anyway.
But on to history. If nobody picked it up from my stupid joke earlier, and we decided to title this something kind of mysterious, we're going to be talking about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride today. And this is an attraction that I have very fond memories of. This was, I don't know why, but it was like as a young child, my favorite attraction. My mom talks about how I always had to do this multiple times when we went to the park. And looking back on it, I do not understand why. But I also found that I was not the only one. There was a very, very strong cult following of Mr.
I
Toad
Definitely.
aficionados.
I would argue
Um,
that this has probably one of the biggest cult followings for any Disney attraction. There are a few that probably can contest with it, but this and Horizons, I'd say it's pretty close.
that's true. And I think it's also funny because it's kind of the one cult following that Disney leaned into a little bit after they took the attraction away, which we'll get into. But I do find the whole kind of like anytime a beloved attraction gets shut down and there's this like uproar behind it, it's always this, it kind of makes you question. It's like, do these people really like the attraction that much, or are they just mad because it's going away? But I think the Mr. Toad people were like really, really into it.
Yeah, it's always hard to find that line of people.
Yeah,
Like, do you actually care, or are you just jumping on the bandwagon?
yeah. But we'll get history started, and we'll start way, way, way before the closure, way before the ride even opened. And this is back in the late 1930s, and Walt Disney and the studio are on top of the world right now. Snow White has premiered, and it is a massive success. They are making buku bucks, and not only was this a huge financial win for the company, but on a more personal note, this is proved to Walt, or proved what Walt had been saying for a long time, that a full length animated feature is viable. It's not only financially viable, but Snow White had incredible critical acclaim, um, and it just showed that this vision he had of making these movies was a possibility. So afterwards, he's got Pinocchio and Fantasia lined up to be released in 1940. And during this time, the studio said, hey, taking these well known fairy tales and developing them into an animated feature seems to be the hot ticket thing. Let's go IP shopping. And they did. They started buying up multiple classic tales, the rights to them, with the plans to make feature animated films. And one of the properties that they ended up purchasing was a little bit different, because while they were kind of grabbing all of these fantasy fairy tales, they also picked up on a children's novel that was written in 1908 called The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. If any of you have read this story, um, you'll know this, but those that haven't, the the book follows along similarly to the film. If you have seen the upcoming film that we're going to talk about, but it is a collection of small short stories that revolve around the characters that are contained within the main plot. But it has a lot more branching plot lines, and everything is kind of roughly centered around the same plot line that the movie story is based around. But it in and of itself it's a collection of short stories basically. um, but this book, when it came out, was extremely popular. It's about Mr. Toad, who is obsessed with owning a motor car, and his friends Mole, Ratty, and Badger, who are trying to keep him out of trouble with this motor car that he acquires. So, the novel was really popular, and one of the strangest facts, coincidences that I found out about this was that over the years, multiple different adaptation of the book were made One of these, before Disney acquired the rights to it, was back in 1922, and there is a stage production of the book that was called Toad of Toad Hall. And the odd coincidence is it was written by A. Milne, who, if you don't know, is the author of the Winnie the Pooh series, which I think is really weirdly coincidence because of what happens later on in the tale of Mr. Toad and the Disney Corporation. um, but anyways, Disney acquires the rights to The Wind in the Willows in 1939, and like a lot of the stuff at this time, they didn't really jump on developing an animation for it right away. Some of this was just because they had other works in production, but a big thing that happened in the early 1940s was the animator strike of 41. So this really drove a wedge through the animators in the studio, those who decided to strike, those who decided not to, and ultimately it delayed development of the films. You also have the war that's going on in Europe at this time. And then ultimately, the release of Bambi in 1942 did not turn nearly as much profit as the studio imagined it would. All this to say that Disney as a company had kind of crested the hill after Snow White, we could say, and they weren't really on top of the world anymore at this point. They are hurting for money. They are in debt based on the production costs. For example, Bambi was in development for 5 years. And, this is Snow White was longer, but Bambi, you kind of think they should have had stuff kind of together by that point. That they've done a couple feature films. They should know how long it's going to take, the costs associated with it. But long story short, Bambi did not make them a lot of money, and the studio was hurting at this point for money. So Walt and the studio decided to step back and kind of take a look at how they were doing things and develop a new strategy. So that was the end of the Age of Innovation, and we come into one of the lower points of Disney animated history, which is the packaged film era. Um,
I love talking about the packaged film era, but hate the movies from it.
Yes, it is without a doubt, I think, one of the most interesting just points in the Disney Corporation's history as a whole. Like, not even just counting the animation studio. But yeah, the films themselves, not good. Not very good.
Not at all.
So looking back at how long it was taking to develop animated films at this time, with Snow White taking, I think it was, over 7 years. Bambi took 5 years. It was all well and good when you have a huge success like Snow White was, or even Pinocchio, that makes the time worth it. But Bambi was a big awakening to say that, when it doesn't, you've not only not turned a very good profit, but you've, spent 5+ years on doing this. Ultimately, it's a huge risk. A lot of what really hurt Bambi wasn't even the quality of the movie or the storytelling itself. It was just, there was a war going on. People didn't have the money to go to the movie theaters like they used to. And, international sales were down majorly compared to domestic sales too. So you didn't even have that to help prop up, poor domestic sales. So long story short, Disney and the studio didn't want to spend time developing full-length animated features that might not return the investment that they put into them. So the idea was to split up the animation team and have each separate sub team work on shorter animation segments that would be packaged together. Sometimes they'd intersperse live action film with it too, and eventually put them all together, and you have a feature length film. Um, this was good because the production times were much shorter. You could get the movies out much cheaper because you don't have your single top animators working throughout almost the whole film. And ultimately, if things go bad, it's not as big a deal as if you spent multiple years developing a film, and it didn't make money. So a lot of these films were very, I won't say very poorly received, but especially compared to a lot of the history of Disney animation, were seen as kind of a dark moment. Three Caballeros, Song of the South, Make My Music, not probably on the top of anybody's animated movie list. They might not have been very critically acclaimed, but the fact of the matter is the profits that the films made helped chew away at the debt that the studio was in, um, and ultimately allowed them to get back to working on full-length feature films. So Cinderella was the next big full-length feature animated film, whose development had been curbed at the time because production costs were getting too high. But they decided to pick back up on that and have it released by 1950. But as they were kind of clawing themselves out of this hole, they still had one more packaged film that they wanted to release. And to do that, they went back to some of the IPs that they had purchased throughout the years, and they had decided to string together animated segments, and combine them into a film that would focus on like literature characters was supposed to be what it was focusing on. So they had the rights to Wind in the Willows. They also had the rights to Ichabod Crane, and Roald Dahl was actually working on a book at this time called Gremlins. And the idea was to take all three of these, tie them together into this animated film that focused on a telling of these literary characters, and call it the Three Fabulous Characters. However, Dahl never finished completing writing the book. Uh, it actually got turned into a Disney Comics and Stories issue that got sent out. But ultimately, they had to kind of scrap this idea of the three characters of literary works, in their animated storytelling of it. And they went ahead with just developing the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And as me and Mario were talking about before we started recording this episode, putting these two together and not having the third to kind of complete this theming feels really awkward.
It really does. And I honestly was not thinking Roald Dahl when you said they had another literature license. I honestly had no idea what else could have matched this and tied it together.
And another thing that was weird about it too is that this would have been Roald Dahl's first like really big popular book, and he was writing it kind of alongside, he was developing it alongside Disney. So it wasn't even like he had written this book, Disney wanted it, and they wanted to buy the rights to it. They were working along with him to develop the book. So even if it was included, it still feels weird that you have these two well-known classic literature characters, and then you're kind of throwing in this third relatively unknown story into the mix. But even so, it feels weird one way or the other to me.
Yeah, this is odd.
So for those of you who haven't seen the movie, do a quick little rundown for you, just because I think it's important to know what did and didn't happen in the movie and what ended up going on in the ride. But long story short, the film is based around the titular Mr. Toad, and he has three friends. Sorry, let me pull this up. I literally just watched this like a half hour ago. I shouldn't need to pull up a synopsis. But yes, Mr. J. Thaddeus Toad Esquire. He's introduced to us as an adventurer and someone who is not tight with his money at all. He ends up going out and buying things to basically take part in whatever the latest fad is. And his friend and kind of bookkeeper McBadger is kind of at a loss with Mr. Toad spending all of his money. So he asked Toad's friends, Ratty and Molly, who, if you can't guess what animals they are,
You're not very bright.
creative naming.
Yeah. But anyways, to try to talk him out of this this spending, but at the same time, Mr. Toad sees a motor car, and this becomes his new obsession, and decides that he needs to have this new machine. Well, Toad is arrested for stealing a car so that he can drive it, because McBadger cut his funds off so he would stop spending so much money. And at the court trial, it is discovered that Mr. Toad has traded the deed to his huge estate, Toad Hall, in order to get this car. But he also got double crossed by Mr. Winky, who is the barman, who supposedly was going to show that he did not, in fact, steal the car. And Mr. Toad ends up in jail. So his buddies break him out of jail, and on Christmas Eve, for some strange reason, don't know why they did it on Christmas Eve, they decide to go break into Town Hall, steal the deed back from Mr. Winky so that he can prove his innocence, which they do. And after he gets out, it is discovered that he has not changed at all, because he's flying around in an airplane, which has become his new obsession. So, keep in mind, it ends just like that. That's what happens, because the ride does not go that way. But
the ride is a very strange twist on this story.
Very, very strange.
Yeah.
And, yeah. The film itself, though, got generally pretty positive reviews, especially compared to the other package era films at the time, and even won a Golden Globe for Best Cinematography.
That is absolutely wild to me, considering how lost in time this movie is.
Definitely. And like we were saying before, it feels weird that you have two short films that don't really seem to have any shared thematic element, any to make you want to watch them together. And because of that, it's like, when do I want to sit down and watch this? Do I want to watch both parts? Am I going to commit to watching both parts? Well, maybe I'll just watch something else, and then you don't end up watching this movie.
Yeah, I think the last time I watched this movie was probably Halloween, not even last year, maybe 2 years ago. And I think the only reason I watched it was because of Ichabod Crane.
Yeah. And I think, if you watch any of the other package era films, it stands well above them in terms of just the animation, the storytelling. Even though you've got two very disjointed stories, at least watching them on their own, like each one on its own is very, very good. And it almost doesn't seem fair to put this in with the packaged films, even though at its heart that's exactly what it is. But it doesn't have the same feel as most of the other pack. Like, this does not feel rushed and sloppily thrown together and solely made just for profit like the rest of the packaged films were.
I mean, I think the other thing about this one specifically is, like, a lot of the other packaged films feel like a collection of shorts. And yeah, I mean, they're, these are two shorts, but not like more than two. That was a weird way to word that. But I feel like if there was more than one short, this would probably blend in a lot better with the package films. Like, this feels like two shorts on a DVD rather than a collection of shorts working together.
Mm-hmm. So by the time this film came out, however, Walt had taken a pretty major step back from being involved with film production and was instead focusing on the development of Disneyland. So in particular, the Fantasyland section of the park was going to be designed to allow guests to jump into a number of their favorite animated films. And originally, he wanted to feature 4 attractions that were themed after, at least at this time, the most popular films that had come out. So Snow White and Peter Pan were both going to get dark rides. Alice in Wonderland was going to get a walkthrough attraction. And then there was going to be a separate area of the land that was going to be themed as Pinocchio Square. And the square was going to have Geppetto's Clock Shop, Stromboli's Puppet Show, and then a traveling carnival in it. So if you want to if you want to play the Station 71 drinking game this week, just take a shot every time we mention something happening for Mr. Toad because of budget constraints.
Oh boy.
Probably should have already taken 3 drinks already, but
I mean, if you want to go even further, you could go back to the news and we can talk about the budget constraints there. So
Oh my gosh.
you would probably be a little bit too far gone for the rest of this episode.
Right.
For
Don't
legal
do this
reasons, we
on
cannot
a
embrace
work
Do this.
site.
Don't do this.
However, due to the scale of the proposed Pinocchio project and the rising cost of the park's development, the idea was scrapped, and the Imagineering team decided that they were going to dial back the Fantasyland development. And instead of having this entire area of the park, they were just going to throw in another dark ride. And, you know, when you look back at this time, it feels kind of weird that Mr. Toad was chosen. But when I really thought about it, I was like, well, it's 1955. You know, Peter Pan is classic that's held up over time. Snow White, I mean, it's the original. And Alice in Wonderland has definitely held up over time, at least in the public's mind. And then you've got Mr. Toad. It's kind of like one of these things does not belong. But by 1955, there hadn't really been that many, like, quote unquote Disney classics that had been released up to this point. So at first I thought, well, that's weird. But then also, what else are you really going to put there? And what else are you going to put there cheap? Which was the main concern with Disney at the time. Overall, though, they thought Mr. Toad would be a good substitution for Pinocchio. The film had been received well. It was relatively recently released. And strangely enough, the theming would kind of fall into what they wanted to do in Fantasyland. And then another thing that also helped drive down the cost was that during the time, a lot of the development planning was going into the ride vehicles that were going to be in each of these. And, you know, Peter Pan got a very distinct ride system that was kind of all of its own. And the Imagineers didn't want to take the time to have to develop something like that. And it seemed very easy to throw in the motor cars from, you know, the adventures of Mr. Toad. And bada bing, bada boom, you got a ride system that we don't really have to put a bunch of cost into development.
Which, I mean, it makes sense. And looking at the ride in, you know, retrospect, you can definitely tell that it is a budget-friendly ride.
Oh, that's for sure.
But I think that it absolutely worked for it.
Yeah. The other thing that was weird to me is that there were some pretty big name Imagineers that worked on this ride. But then I think, well, it's probably not that surprising that this isn't the first thing at the top of their resumes. So Bill Martin, Ken Anderson, Claude Coates, and Robert Matty were the 4 lead engineers on developing this ride.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know. Especially you think Ken Anderson and Claude Coates, it's like, well, do I list Haunted Mansion first or do I put Mr. Toad's Wild Ride?
Yeah, that's...
Tough
I was
call.
not expecting that.
The original facade of all the Fantasyland attractions were originally developed to be rather ornate, and Mr. Toad's was no exception. The original design was going to have guests entering the front of Toad Manor before getting in their cars and going into the show building. However, as many of us know, development costs started to rise, and all of the attractions had their facade changed to the medieval fair tent style designs that kind of became a classic staple of Fantasyland, but also severely dated when you look back at pictures of it.
Yeah.
And especially it, I don't know, when you really look back at it, it doesn't make sense for really any of the attractions. I mean, I guess it fit with the castle theming, but I mean, why does a medieval fair fit in with Peter Pan? Why does it fit in with Mr. Toad? Like, none of these were during medieval eras.
I feel like the theme of Fantasyland is just very much accepted,
Yeah.
and that's it. Like, nobody questions it. Nobody, like, thinking about it as a medieval fair, it kind of breaks my brain a little bit, but I don't want to think about that.
I guess at the same time, too, it's like, what are you comparing this to? It's 1955. What other theme parks out there are you saying, oh, this doesn't live up to the standards of theme parks, which don't really exist?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true because Disney is kind of setting the standard as they go. And even then, I feel like if we looked at the lands in their original form, not really where they end up, because obviously they haven't, most of them have been around for a very long time. They all probably look at least similar. So they're just trying to say, well, what do these at least mildly fit into?
Yeah. So outside of the facades, finances also had a major impact on the ride design itself. And this is probably the most iconic part of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And that is the fact that while the other Fantasyland attractions were receiving 3D models throughout, Mr. Toad was late to the game on the development timeline, and most of the ride effects were created from painted 2D plywood cutouts.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting looking back at it because it feels so out of place. Looking back, even just watching ride through videos, it and looking at something that was in Disneyland at the time, it still feels awkwardly out of place. It doesn't necessarily feel like a Disney attraction.
Yeah,
The
I never rode the ride at Disney World, but I did ride it when I went to Disneyland in 2018, just because I had never ridden it.
mm-hmm.
And I was kind of shocked simultaneously at how much I liked it and how cheap it felt.
And I think that's kind of the charm that held up over the years with it, was that it was this, it's like how much can you do with a shoestring budget, and it's kind of cute what Disney came up with.
Yeah. It was almost like campy,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. So the other thing that really helped drive down the cost with doing these 2D plywood cutouts and simple painted walls was that nearly the entire ride was able to be built off property and then just transported onto the site. Um, so it helped by not having to have the show building in place first. It helped by not having to work around other construction that was going on at the time. They basically built the ride at the Imagineering studio and then broke it down, shipped it over, reassembled it. Construction on the show building actually didn't even begin until 1954, and so in basically less than a year, this entire attraction was built. The other thing, aside from the effect design and then being based off of 2D plywood cutouts, was that the other attractions in Fantasyland were relying very heavily on the popularity of the films that they were based on, and were kind of trying to basically retell the story um, of the film that they were based on. And I don't want to say like rest on the laurels of the film, but in a sense, it was kind of like, well, you know the story. We'll throw you into the story. You understand it. You get to see the characters that you know, and you'll enjoy this. But they want to do something kind of different with Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So instead of just viewing the story, they really wanted the guests to take the place of Mr. Toad, get in his car, and see the story from his perspective. So even though the ride was using some scenes from the movie as kind of a basis, they spent a lot of time on the track layout to kind of simulate the chaotic nature of Mr. Toad driving and have it be an actual ride kind of in and of itself and not only be enjoyable if you were a fan of the movie.
Well, here's what I'll say is that I definitely found it enjoyable, but not having seen this movie since I was very, very young, I really felt like I had no idea what was going on the whole time. So it kind of added to the, like, I don't know, fun of it in a way. But also it just made it a little confusing because I was just like, wait, what's happening?
Well, that's a good time for me to jump into the actual kind of ride through of this now that I've gone through the plot synopsis of the movie, and you can see how very little they line up. So I don't think it's just you. So guests would enter the show building where there was an ornate mural that featured many of the characters in the scene from the movie. The ride vehicles themselves were two-seater cars similar to the one in the film that had a steering wheel on one side. And I always remember fighting with my brother to be the one that got to sit in the steering wheel like I was actually driving the thing. But after boarding, riders were taken into Toad Hall, driven through the library before crashing through a bookcase and into the countryside. You would then swerve to avoid crashing into a cabin and wind up in a small town. You then crash through a roadblock as a police officer cutout commands you to stop. You near the city docks and swerve again to avoid riding into the water. The car would then near a tower of barrels and swerve to avoid them, crashing through a brick wall and into a much creepier section of the countryside. Another police officer would try to stop you before continuing on past a sleeping railroad worker and into a dark tunnel. In the darkness, a light would appear, a train horn would sound, simulating a crash. Guests then found themselves at the entrance to hell and rode through a room full of flame and dancing devils, and finally the cars would crash through a wall and into the Anaheim sunlight, completing the ride. Now, I ask you, why did they do this? Because it has absolutely nothing to do with the plot of what happened in Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, aside from there being a car.
I don't know, but I love this. Like, what other attraction can you ride that will take you straight to hell?
None. And not only is it like, okay, you went to hell. It wasn't. They don't even wrap it up with like, oh no, he was dreaming. It's okay. Now you learn from your mistakes. That's it. You go to hell and the ride's over.
It's kind of like how on Mission Space they leave you on Mars.
That's a good point, actually. See, the only thing about that is that you're supposed to believe that you're in a training simulation, right?
Yeah.
But like,
yeah, that's
Mr.
true.
Toad, you're supposed to.
Oh no, you actually die.
You die and you go to hell.
Maybe it's a statement about Anaheim.
Maybe, ooh.
Because you said you crashed through back into the Anaheim, and you're like, oh, well, I'm still in hell, I guess. I'm just kidding. I had a great time at Disneyland. I had no problems.
So yeah, that was the original iteration of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. So it was an opening day attraction, opened up in 1955, and then in 1961, a lot of the Fantasyland attractions received updates. Mr. Toad saw a few, but a lot of the work went into updating the already more expensive attractions, notably Peter Pan. But the things that they did change was they slightly extended the opening scene in Toad Hall. They added a fountain into the town square. And then some of the crash walls that you drive through became a little more detailed, but they were still just two-dimensional plywood cutouts. um, but then finally, weirdly enough, the most detailed changes were in the final hell scene, where they decided that they wanted to take out some of the 2D cutouts and replace them with 3D figurines. So they decided to do the little devil creatures that were in hell, and then add more detail to the flaming, scary walls. It's strange to me, not only that the Imagineers decided to go through with this, but also that it got signed off on, and that also every single time they either updated or made a new iteration of this attraction, they just doubled down on it and continued with that same idea.
Yeah, it's. I feel like once they committed to it, they kind of just had to keep going.
I guess so. But on to later iterations. Disneyland, as we know, picked up a lot of success in the late 50s and 60s, and Walt and the Imagineers started working on development for the new Florida park. And though Disney World was being planned on a much larger scale than Disneyland, much of the concepts for the Magic Kingdom were borrowed from the original park. And after seeing what worked in Anaheim as well as in the 64 to 65 World's Fair, the team decided that Peter Pan, Snow White, and It's a Small World would be really popular attractions to have in Florida's version of Fantasyland. The Imagineers also wanted to throw in a fourth ride into that section, and they had a number of different ideas that were proposed. Some of the most notable ones were completely original attractions. One that was going to be based on Ichabod Crane, one that was going to be based on Sleeping Beauty, and even a Mary Poppins attraction. And all of these saw some small initial development. But in the end, here we go. They decided that it would be much cheaper and simpler to just add another version of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride into the park.
It's at least more appropriate this time because Florida actually is hell.
Yes.
I love watching, like, I don't remember this attraction at all, but I love watching ride-throughs, and the jarring exit of leaving this attraction and going into the bright sun is always amusing to me.
As the camera takes that like 1 to 2 seconds to actually adjust to the light.
Yep.
And it's like, yep.
You're like, oh, look, the bright lights. Doesn't that mean that I'm in heaven? And then it's like, no, this is just Florida.
So, yeah. Disney World's version wasn't just a carbon copy of Disneyland's, though. Aside from having a much more detailed queue, the attraction featured 2 separate ride tracks that gave guests unique experiences depending on which they chose. And I thought this was really cool and also kind of strange because they threw it into Disney World's Fantasyland because it was a cheap option. But then at the same time, they took all of this time to develop 2 track layouts to give you 2 different rides. And it's like, well, was it better to have like 2 cheap rides, or should we have just done one kind of better ride?
Right.
But anyways, the other cool thing was that it kind of worked in conjunction with having 2 cars on these 2 separate tracks because they played them off of each other when you actually got on the ride. So when you got into either car on either track A or track B, both of the cars would go into Toad Hall. One would turn left, one would turn right, and then before you leave the first scene, both of the cars are running towards each other and then swerve away from each other at the last minute and take you onto each separate parts. So for track A, guests would go through Toad's Trophy Room and then into the kitchen before heading outside into a forest. I apologize for this, but this is how it was referred to in the movie and how it was referred to in all of the Disney World historical documentation of it, but they refer to it as a gypsy camp that you ride through. After leaving the camp, the car travels the wrong way down a one-way street and then again almost collides with the car from the other track. And then both of the cars go through a town square area. So if you are on track A, you veer off and you go into a tavern with, I'm not joking, and I do not remember this, but there's a naked Rapunzel mural on the wall, as well as a
What?
very, yes,
Wow.
well as a, I'll pull up the picture. It's okay. She's naked, but her hair is covering her goods, I'll say.
Her goods.
Yeah. But yes, on top of that, there's also like a very scantily clad like barmaid in the scene. Overall, it's very odd to see it in a Disney World attraction. Um Anyways, after going through the main part of the bar, you travel into a back room that's filled with barrels and the Weasel Gang from the movie. Your car then travels outside, nearly runs over a fisherman, and then you travel into a dark railroad tunnel, collide with the train, go to hell. Um, Very similar to the original Disneyland version, but this time instead of just all the little cute demon creatures, it's actually like a 2D like plywood Satan in the final hell scene. So one minor change.
Nice.
Yeah. So if instead you decided to go on track B after your initial miss in Toad Hall, you crashed through a fireplace into the library, which featured McBadger, and then you travel outside through a barnyard with cows and crash through the door of the barn. And inside the barn, there's a bunch of two-dimensional chickens flying overhead. You then continue onto the other side of the one-way street and almost run into the car from track A again. And you go through the same town square area. But then this time you take a turn into a courtroom where the judge finds you guilty of reckless driving and sends you to jail. In jail, the gang of weasels are planning an escape, and after breaking out, you find yourself in a shootout between the police and the weasels, and then you swerve into a railroad tunnel, and the ride concludes the same way as it did from track A. So again, they decided to,
So you go
create
to
this.
hell either way.
Go to hell either way. There's no,
You're
yeah,
not
the
getting out
ending's
of
the same,
this.
which I think is even more kind of just. It's like not you. It's like the illusion of choice, right? It's like, oh, do you take track A? Do you take track B? It doesn't matter. You're going to hell either way.
No.
I
You're dead.
yeah,
You sinned. You're going to hell. No matter
yeah.
what choice you made.
So in 1983, Disneyland's Fantasyland received a major overhaul, and the named New Fantasyland saw new attractions as well as overhauls to existing ones. Mr. Toad's entire show building was gutted and the track was removed in order to implement this update. And finally, the really good thing about this was that for New Fantasyland and Disneyland, they tore down the Renaissance Fair facades, and each attraction got its own unique facade. And they actually went with the original Toad Manor, or sorry, Toad Hall facade that they had originally planned. And looking at pictures of it, I think it looks very, very good. Definitely something that I wish Fantasyland and Disney World had more of, at least in the older sections of Fantasyland.
Yeah, I'm looking at these pictures now. This is actually kind of crazy.
Yeah, like it's very well done.
The outside of the ride is actually better designed than the attraction.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's honestly kind of funny.
Yeah.
Which also, it's weird because I feel like at this point, okay, it's 1983. This version in Disneyland has been open for almost 30 years at this point, right? So it's kind of like you're going to spend all of this money updating this, what was a budget placeholder attraction. But I feel like even by this time it has gotten that cult following kind of because of how just like kitschy it is, and they leaned into it and thought like, okay, yeah, we'll spruce up the outside, but on the inside, yeah, we're going to redo the track. They ended up making it longer and featured like a lot of the scenes from the Disney World version. But at the same time, the vast majority of this ride is plywood cutouts that move out of the way as you drive past them.
It feels very state fairy.
Right. Which, on the one hand, sounds like a bad thing, but it's also within Disneyland a very unique feel for an attraction to have.
True.
And it's what's even more funny about that is I think it being State Fairy fits with the original theme of Fantasyland of
Yeah.
Right.
medieval carnival.
Well, the thing too that I think is that it's almost a very fitting representation of the film was that, yeah, we have a successful IP. Sure, we could take the time, develop it into something really incredible, or we could package it together into a film to earn a quick buck. So it's like it was a cheap placeholder film and it got turned into a cheap placeholder attraction.
Appropriate.
Yeah. So, weirdly enough, one of the very futuristic elements that they did try to add during this update was a projection onto a smoke screen that would come down, but because the cars were moving through it so fast, it really didn't have enough time for the smoke to refill before the next car came through. So you very rarely actually got to see the projection onto the smoke screen. So after trying to do it for like 3 years, they just took it out. So back to the plywood cutouts. So that was in 1983, and the new Fantasyland overhaul was pretty much the only major update either version of the ride received in the history of it. And for the next several years, both operated without any change. At this point, undeniably, the ride had become a cult classic. Even though the 2D cutouts were originally a cost-cutting measure, many of the fans loved the simplistic feel it lent the ride. However, by the late 90s, Disney had begun a push to remove potentially insensitive parts of attraction, especially those within Magic Kingdom. Um, Over the years, many parents had complained about the bar scene, the risque images, and then quite obviously the final hell scene. Um, and I don't know. On the one hand, it's like I hate people that complain about that kind of stuff, but at the same time, it's kind of like, man, if there was any attraction that they were probably like, it made sense for them to complain about, it was Mr. Toad. Especially the like naked Rapunzel. I just don't even understand. That feels
That's
like
still
something that
wild.
somebody tried to slip in there that didn't get caught, and it happened. Um, but needless to say, in 1997, Disney announced a possible closure of the Disney World version of the attraction. So, for those that don't know, a few years before this, Disney kind of just like up and closed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and everybody got super pissed off because it seemed like it came out of absolutely nowhere, and it was a really, really beloved attraction. But at the end of the day, it had really, really high operational costs, and Disney decided to scrap it. But they just kind of closed it one day and then didn't reopen it without saying anything. So it rubbed people the wrong way. So in 97, when Disney is kind of toying around with this idea of closing Mr. Toad, they decided that they will announce it as a possible closure of the attraction, which is going to be replaced with Winnie the Pooh. And this idea was met with immediate fan outrage. Many took to writing letters to Disney voicing their distaste. They went on news reports about this. And my favorite is that now this is the early days of the internet. All right, this is like the mid to late 90s that this is happening. But people were getting together and making websites to try to keep Mr. Toad's Wild Ride an attraction at Disney World. And so people were getting together and making a bunch of merchandise like t-shirts or buttons for people to wear in the parks. And one of my favorite ones was a t-shirt that had Winnie the Pooh and one of the devils from Mr. Toad's Wild Ride on it. And it said, "Tell Pooh to go to hell." And then it had a link to the website where you could join and chat with your other fellow Mr. Toad fans about doing what you can to keep the attraction alive.
I want that shirt.
I feel like. Go ahead.
Can we make that shirt again? Can we put that on our Redbubble?
I guarantee if there's like an original one on eBay, it's probably going for some insane money right now.
All right, so one of our artist listeners hit us up with the design to put on our Redbubble, and we will purchase the design from you.
I found an image of this Tell Pooh to Go to Hell thing, and it is straight out of the 90s. I know that you said it links to the Save Toad website, but can we talk about that for a minute? Because this is my favorite internet time capsule.
I'm sorry. Is that still active?
Oh, it absolutely is.
I did not even go to the website. Oh my goodness.
Have you not been on here before?
No. Oh my god.
Okay, okay, it's great because my favorite part about this, and this is just totally irrelevant to the actual conversation about it, but if you type in savetoad.com, it'll take you to the website, but the website is math.miami.edu/ and then it's a directory to someone. So it's the way that it's hosted, and this is me just getting way too into like technical web stuff. It's not actually a website, but it's a static page, obviously, because it's the 90s. Like, that's how websites were written in the 90s. But it's a static page hosted on mathmiami.edu, which, if you take all of the directory stuff away, it goes to the mathematics department of Miami University. So somewhere in the mathematics department of Miami University is this static website hosted to save Mr. Toad. But that's not even the best part about this. The best part about all of this is that if you scroll down, they have the phone numbers to Marty Sklar, Judson Green, Al Weiss, Dave, like just all of these big executive Disney people. Like, they have their main lines linked to them so people could call them. They had mailing addresses for people like Michael Eisner on here. Like, these people were so dedicated to trying to save Mr. Toad. And it's honestly, it's kind of cool that this is like a thing that happened because, like Brian said before, you know, we live in an era now where we know when attractions are going to close. But back then, obviously, like, Disney wasn't announcing this stuff. There was no way for them to tell people like, hey, this attraction's closing. Now they pretty much capitalize on that. This was how people knew that like these attractions were so well loved. And I find this kind of internet fandom just so crazy cool.
Yeah, I love these people.
It's fascinating.
I especially love the part where they put Marty Sklar on here and said, keep in mind that Marty is not a corporate weasel. Imagineering is responsible for creating the ride. Be supportive.
So also, if you scroll down, there's a link on there and it says see the postcards. This is another thing that apparently they were doing, was they had these postcards that they had already like pre-filled out to Judson Green and Al Weiss that they were mailing to them that says Motor Mania is not a crime, save Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and it has a link to the website. It's crazy.
This is incredible.
There's also and they're out of shirts now, of course, years later. But they have two other shirts on here.
20 years.
Right. They have shirts that say "Ask me why Mr. Toad is killing," or why Mickey is killing Mr. Toad. And then they have this one of, it says "Save Mr. Toad's Wild Ride," but the save is above the attraction like banner, and there's a picture of a dead Mr. Toad on the ground with two little kids in front of it.
I am obsessed with this design. I want this shirt.
I have spent hours on this website. I kid you not. There's so many corners of this to explore, and maybe this is like an after the thought kind of thing. But if you delete the address that says Toad and just go to this like directory of jam, it has this like it is just full on 90s, and it gives you this like scram punk do not enter thing, and if you click on it, it plays a sound clip from Pirates of the Caribbean, and there's just some peak 90s web building here.
Incredible.
My mouth has been agape this whole time looking at this website. Incredible.
if there is one thing that I bring to the table to this show, it is the obscure corners of Disney fandom that I have just found a lot of time in.
I love that. Okay, so if you're on the page and you go to the electronic Toad Hall, which is where they keep a lot of like, I guess, write-in and comments that people have given to the website over the years. At the
Yep.
top, it just has this thing that says it's obviously like a link through an image, but it says click the incarcerated weasel above to learn more about the great and powerful Toad. And if you click on it, it just is like an info about Mr. Toad and the wind and the willows and everything.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is
It's
fantastic.
it's cool because again, this is the one thing I genuinely like about the internet is that I feel like things like this are just there for us years later to look at. And I mean, honestly, I don't think we would be talking about Mr. Toad today if it wasn't for people like this.
Definitely.
Oh my god, this is amazing. I just think you're so dedicated to this. I love this part that says, "Well, it looks like this rat Fink Eisner has finally done it. Mr. Toad had his last wild ride on Labor Day." Wow.
Yeah, this is it's crazy. I love this, and I'm so happy that we got to talk about it. Oh, the Pooh flyers are on here too. I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
And
honestly,
honestly,
more so than the shirt, the flyer is what I want a t-shirt of.
the Tell Pooh to go to hell
Yes,
flyer,
I
where the
love
devil
that.
kind of looks like Figment, like in a weird way.
I'm
I
not
wonder.
gonna disparage my boy like that.
I'm like 99% sure the person who designed Figment designed the devils for the ride.
Well, I guess that would make it make sense then. Oh my gosh, can you imagine the people who wore these shirts in public that say, "Ask me why Mickey is killing Mr. Toad"? Like, do you think people would actually ask them?
There were news people coming up because of this. This was getting news coverage.
Incredible.
So seriously, there were people that were like apparently from the announcement of the closure, which was in like late 1997 up until when the ride closed, which was in September of 1998, that there were protesters standing outside the attraction pretty much every day. Like
Yeah,
that's what I'm
I
talking about. When I was like, "Oh, I don't know if people really care." Like this did not happen with any other ride closure I can
Right. You
ever.
didn't see anybody in front of Maelstrom
No.
protesting, like
well, and I think that's also it's such a symptom of the time, right? Like because Disney now announces when things are closing. Like I I mean, I also think that, you know, this is more of a like a couple people cared a lot more than they probably should have, but at the same time you have like these rides that people love just suddenly closing. And on top of that, like, now when something closes, we know pretty much a month or so at least in advance. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even look at Horizons and, how when that closed and reopened, you have like the whole Mesa Verde Times thing going on. Like, I I think that this is just Disney of this era was just you didn't know what you were going to get on your next trip.
Yeah. And so that was the other weird thing was that, Disney kind of chose to let it out there that they might be closing the attraction because of all the negative backlash that they had gotten from 20,000 Leagues. But then at the end of the day, they up and officially announced the closure only 4 days before the ride shuts down. So, it was like you were trying to soften the blow with kind of like almost leaking out that maybe we're going to close it. But then when you actually decide, you don't give people the time to ride it that would want to do it one last time.
Yeah.
yeah, that's Michael Eisner for you.
Yeah. Which honestly, it's funny because, I mean, if there ever was an attraction that it would seem like Michael Eisner would respect, it would be Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Right. That
I
it
mean,
really doesn't make sense.
this is the
Oh, it
definition
doesn't.
of singles and doubles right here. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the singlest you can get, and it paid off. I mean, I can't think of another attraction that had such a low barrier of development that stuck around for over 40 years, you know? Like any other opening day attraction that's still in the park, you kind of look at it and you say, I understand while it's still there, it still has holding power, it's still very popular. But I mean, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, it was like, I think it was popular because it was cheap and just fun and goofy in and of itself. So anybody that wants to ride it, as Beth said, you can still go to Disneyland and do it, but unfortunately in the Magic Kingdom it is dead. But there are a few small nods to the attraction still. A lot of people know that if you ride the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, there's a picture of Mr. Toad handing the deed to Owl, and there's also another picture of Badger tipping his hat to Pooh. And then there's also the statue of Mr. Toad in the Pet Cemetery of the Haunted Mansion, which I feel is kind of like rude almost, but it's fun.
Oh, I love that one.
It's good. It's fun. And that's what I was saying, that like even this is the one ride that I feel like Disney leaned into kind of the like, you know, the cult following and the backlash and everything, like a very tongue-in-cheek response to it where, you know, it's like I don't feel like Disney would do this anymore nowadays, but it's cool that they did it back then.
Yeah.
But so that's it. So now, Beth, you said that you never rode the Disney World version.
Right.
Mario, did you?
Honestly, I don't know. I feel like this attraction is probably not in my repertoire of Disney attractions I've been on.
I will say, if I did ride it, I was like 6 years old, so I don't
Right.
remember riding it if I did.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
it kind of makes sense, like hearing about the Disney World version, why you as a kid would have liked it so much, because it seems like it at least had like the dueling dragons kind of element in a very, very mild way.
You know, it was funny because, you know, when I was typing up this stuff about the actual ride layout, that was, my mind went immediately to Dueling Dragons first, because that was another ride that I loved as a kid. And at the same time, it's like it's very similar ideas, and that each ride has its own unique thing going on, and then whoosh, they go right past each other, and then they go off and do their own unique thing, and then whoosh, they go right past each other, and then they go off again. Even though one is, you know, a very thrilling roller coaster and the other one is a little kitschy dark ride, but I mean,
Yeah.
it is funny that, yeah, that's exactly where my mind went to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the story of one of the oddest attractions that has probably ever graced the Disney parks, and one that I can say I do not think we will ever see the likes of again.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Although, I mean, I gotta say, I feel like Winnie the Pooh is still very much so in the same vein of this. Obviously, it has a lot more effects and 3D models, but it still has a similar vibe.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh is a deceptively scary attraction.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. That the room with the heffalumps and woozles freaks me out, and also that scene where Pooh is like
drowning,
astral projecting.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what is happening? It's the same thing I thought when I rode Mr. Shadow. I was like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. What is going on?
So honestly, I don't even remember riding the Pooh ride like as a child, but I distinctly remember like going back to Disney World for the first time like when I was in college, getting on that and the little astral projection part and being like, what in the hell is
Yeah.
going on right now?
What is he doing?
Yeah.
And also
Oh, man.
how just eerily good that effect is.
It is bizarre how good that is. It's good enough to make me feel weird about it.
Yeah. And I think that's what works with it, is because it's like, okay, you are in kind of this, very goofy kids ride that still does the whole like 2D cutout thing, but then you have like astral projection going on, like that somebody
Right.
probably spent months working on to have it come out right. Very interesting.
Yeah. I gotta say, I miss this era, though, of like, hey, let's put some weird, creepy stuff. Obviously, we have a few things like Haunted Mansion that's like inherently spooky, but like Snow White's Scary Adventure, like that ride had no business being as scary as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Toad's, I feel like to a kid could be very creepy because you're like, what? Why am I in hell? The scene, honestly, it's like I feel like they're not doing that anymore. Come on, y'all, let's like scare kids again.
Yo, look, I might get flack for this, but with current leadership, let's just bring Eisner back. I mean,
hey,
come on. Hey,
honestly, it can't get any worse.
Shots.
He was. He dreamed big. Eisner's problem was never that he didn't want more for the parks; is that he couldn't afford what he wanted.
Eisner had a lot of ideas, all right? He was an idea man. A lot of them were really, really bad ideas, but he had ideas.
Right, he was at least trying to do stuff.
Exactly. I'll take somebody that's trying and failing any day other than somebody that doesn't care and is counting pennies.
Definitely.
We need you, Michael Eisner.
I wonder how he's doing.
Michael Eisner, you're our only hope.
Yes. Bless it.
So I will say too, before we close it out, definitely a lot of my research for this came from a Yesterworld video. He did a great job on this, and if you want to see a lot of the visuals that we've been talking about, definitely check out his video on this. It's great. And yeah, you can see the like naked Rapunzel thing and question why Disney ever thought that was a good idea.
Nice. I'm definitely going to go look for naked Rapunzel after this.
Well, this was a good one, Brian. Thank you for throwing this together and doing all the research on it, as always.
It felt good, like getting back on the horse of doing a history episode, because it's been a while. It has been a very long time.
Yeah, I don't even know what our last history was, but this was a good one to come back with, I think.
For sure. A kind of a sleeper hit, I think.
Yeah, which the attraction itself was, so there we go.
There you go.
Hey, wait a minute. So the last time you guys recorded was the one you did with John episode, right?
Yes.
So do you know what that means?
Is this 500?
This is episode number 200.
Oh, wow. This is a choice to pick for episode 200.
Yeah.
But I'll take it. I think it's pretty on brand for us, though.
Yeah. I mean, our first episode, we didn't even introduce ourselves or anything. So 5 years later, here we are, still just winging it. 200 episode special. That's what we're calling it.
200 episode special. We talked about an obscure Disney attraction, a weird Disney internet fandom. Begged for Michael Eisner to come back and complained about the current Disney leadership. I think that just sums up this podcast perfectly.
Yeah, man. It feels right.
I feel like I learned a lot more about Mr. Toad than I was expecting.
Probably more than you ever really needed to.
Honestly, probably.
the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.